days of the war in Ukraine and Russia rages on. Ukraine has been reeling under Russia's relentless assault for the 100th straight day. There seems to be no end anytime in near sight. 100 days after the Ukraine war started, the eastern part of the war-torn nation remains besieged, with Russian forces carrying out missile attacks in parts of the country. Here's a detailed report, all that you need to know.
The fire in Eastern Europe has been burning out for the last 100 days. The war that started on February 24th is nowhere near its end.
I've taken the decision to conduct a special military operation. Its purpose is to protect people who have been subject to abuse and genocide by the Kyiv regime for 8 years. And to do this, we will strive to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine.
The special ops Russian President Vladimir Putin expected to end in a few days could go on for many more days, if not months. Ukraine has resisted, and how? The European continent has found a new hero in President Volodymyr Zelensky, who refused to flee his country when faced with Russian invasion.
Всім добрий вечір. Лідер фракції тут, голова Офісу президента тут, прем'єр-міністр Шмигаль тут, Подоляк тут, президент тут. Всі ми тут, наші військові тут, громадяни суспільства тут, всі ми тут. Захищаємо нашу незалежність, нашу державу. І так буде й далі. Слава нашим захисникам, слава нашим захисницям. Слава Україні!
Russia advanced quickly through eastern Ukraine, but faced the Ukrainian might as its forces neared Kyiv. While it rained death and destruction, stiff fight back forced the Russian forces to make a strategic retreat from the gates of the capital city. The Russian pullback from Kyiv revealed the real horrors of the war. The killings of civilians in Bucha, a suburb of Kyiv, shocked humanity. India Today's reporters who were in Bucha revealed the real picture to the entire world.
And armored personal carriers show and indicate the kind of battles that have taken place in this area. Not one, not two, but multiple burnt tanks and APCs in this area.
Many nations have since then launched investigations into alleged war crimes in Bucha. Having pulled back from Kyiv, Russia shifted focus to Donbas region in its second phase of war. Today, Russia controls key Ukrainian cities in eastern Ukraine, including Mariupol and Kherson. Heavy fighting has ensued in Mykolaiv and Kharkiv. While Russia has made significant war gains, they have come at a huge economic cost. The country is reeling under sanctions imposed by the West.
I spent a lot of time in Ukraine when I was a senator and vice president. I've spoken to the Rada in the days when they, in fact, didn't have what you'd call democracy, and was there in the Maidan when the former leader had to take off and head into Russia. And so, you know, with the Ukrainian people have a lot of backbone. They have a lot of guts, and I'm sure you're observing it.
Russia so far has put up a brave front. Kremlin has time and again warned the world of severe consequences, even dangling the nuclear threat at times. The effect of the war is being felt across the globe. Inflation is surging, posing the single biggest challenge to the whole world. For a world that's emerging out of a pandemic, the Ukraine war has come as a double blow. Bureau Report, India Today.
All right, let me quickly cut across to Akshita Nandagopal, bringing us an understanding here on what exactly has happened in the last 100 days. This war on Ukraine has led to several refugees now trying to escape, and how safe are they? A quick glimpse into that.
Let's tell you about the countries that Ukrainians fled to and where they're finding refuge. Based on the data of the UN Human Rights Commission, here's the information that we have. The maximum number of refugees made their way to neighboring Poland. A whopping 36,27,178 Ukrainians made their way to Poland. The next country that most of them headed to was neighboring Romania, because from, in fact, central Ukraine, it was easiest to make their way to Romania. Over 9 lakh, nearly 10 lakh refugees in Romania as well. Interestingly, from eastern parts of Ukraine, they made their way to Russia. This was Russia's intention. Their army ensured that there were corridors open for people to make their way over into Russia, and there too, it's over 9,70,000 refugees. Besides that, several Ukrainians who made their way to other neighboring countries, some of them to Belarus, but mostly to Slovakia, Hungary, as well as Moldova. All of these countries border Ukraine, so it was easier for them to make their way over to these countries. This data tells you about how many lives were displaced because of this war.
All right, I'm going to quickly cut across to our Foreign Affairs editor, Geeta Mohan, who joins us live from the newsroom. She was covering the war right from the start. Geeta was in Ukraine. She was also in Russia. Geeta, you've covered this war from all angles. At this point, when we mark this somber 100 days, Ukrainians, of course, admitting now that at least 20% of territory has fallen to the hands of Russia. Give us an understanding on the dynamics post the 100 days of this war.
There were a few goals that Putin had, some achieved, but in terms of timeline, certainly not what Putin was looking at. A very quick shock and awe military operation was what he wanted, but couldn't achieve. And this is the reason why we're looking at 100th day of the war, which is untenable in many ways than one in these times, because of the resources that have gone in, the lives that have been lost on both sides, and the destruction of infrastructure. Having said that, Nabila, the situation on the ground is very clear. Donbas region, Donetsk and Luhansk, barring one major city where the fight is still on because Ukrainians are trying to push the Russians back, the region is largely under Russian control. But Russia had two very important key demands. That is, recognizing Donetsk and Luhansk as independent republics and recognizing Crimea as a part of Russian territory, which Zelensky has already said that it is not going to happen. They're not going to cede any territory, not even from 2014. These are areas that have been under Russian control since 2014. But Russia has gone beyond the Donbas region. They're now in Zaporizhia. Anything in the south of Dnieper River is now under the control of Russia, barring Mykolaiv, parts of Mykolaiv, and Odessa certainly absolutely under Ukrainian control. But these are large swaths of land that we're looking at, that we're talking about. So if the world today, at this moment, at this juncture, talks about negotiations, Putin does have an upper hand. But we also know that there's a lot of equipment and weapons that are now being sent to Ukraine. And should Ukraine use it, can Russia then sustain the war? And can Russia continue the control it has in eastern Ukraine, parts of eastern Ukraine, is the question. We also know from the conversations that I've had with people in Moscow that the idea now is not just Donbas and Crimea. It is to ensure that Russia secures an entire buffer zone, whether if it's land boundary or the seas, to a buffer zone between Ukraine and Russia to secure Russian land and Russian interests should Kyiv continue looking at NATO.
You know, Geeta, at this point, we're only imagining the kind of trauma that many of those locals have gone through. A large population, a large chunk of the population in Ukraine have already fled to several different countries. What's the future for them? If at all Russia now takes complete control, are they seemingly willing to come back to the country if under Russia's control?
Well, many of them. There are certain people from certain walks of life or certain strata of life, Nabila, who would have looked at going to Europe and might not have found those opportunities. Now they are in Europe. But largely, people in Ukraine who did not move because they did not have an option in their own country. It is because this is a huge refugee crisis that Europe is facing today. Should things normalize, there are people who have homes, who have business, who have industries, or who have jobs to keep, and they might and surely would be coming back. Also remember, in this entire refugee crisis or the exodus of people that you've seen, most of the people who left and are in Europe today, Nabila, are women and children. Men stayed back because they were fighting the war. Any male member of a family or male citizen of Ukraine who is under the age of 18 was not allowed to leave the country. So family members who are now in European countries would be looking to come back to their loved ones who are fighting the war. So not everybody is going to stay, but yes, certain number of them will or would want to stay back in Europe, but largely most of them would want to come back should there be peace between Russia and Ukraine, Nabila.
Right. Thank you very much, Geeta. I'm going to come back to you, but for now we know that this has caused severe trauma to families, to children alike in Ukraine. Where peace abides, certainly children's laughter ripples through neighborhoods. When peace flourishes, parents have the time to spark their children's imagination. In peace, really, does a smile break out watching the antics of busy toddlers. Only in peace can a child grow. Not in a country where shelling is a daily routine, not in a land where tanks roll down the streets, not in Ukraine, where parents have had to put down their children from their laps, pick up guns to defend their motherland. In Ukraine today, the night is dark, full of hurt, because their children are orphaned.
More than 200 schools, around 35 hospitals, and hundreds of residential buildings, possibly close to 2,000, have been destroyed since the war began in Ukraine. Towns and villages across the eastern half of the besieged country do not have electricity and water. And in the intense cold of the snow-covered terrain, there is no heat. Millions of ordinary Ukrainians are hiding in bunkers and shelters, shivering in the cold uncertainty of mounting loss. UNICEF has put up this appeal on their landing page on Ukraine. Children in Ukraine are facing a deadly crisis as the hostilities in their country are increasing. Like all conflicts, this is turning into a children's crisis, and they will need as much humanitarian support and help as we can provide. With the intensifying of indiscriminate bombing of civilian targets, lives are being lost, and some of them are children. On 7th of March, human rights sources inside Ukraine released actual numbers of children killed, 38 dead and 71 injured. The survivors are rushing to the borders, clad in their winter clothing, holding on to their mothers or elders, trusting hands clasping those of adults, making unplanned journeys to the unknown, to faraway lands where strangers try and make them feel welcome.
Just 2 days ago, we had a transport of 700 kids. And, it's not easy to find a place for anybody, but it's even tougher to find a place for 700 kids in the same one place.
As their homes and lives are torn apart by other unseen strangers, firing big guns from somewhere beyond the dreadful horizon. Natasha, a 16-year-old Ukrainian refugee from before this war even started, writes, "The war came to us and happiness is no more than a ghost from my dreams. Natasha used to live in the seaside village of Shirokh in eastern Ukraine. The last time she saw her house, she was 11. Natasha writes, "Our hearts are full of sadness. We have no home. The night is black." Two children died among the 21 in Sumy. The victims had been killed in an airstrike on a residential street. At that time, a ceasefire was supposed to be in force. Every day that the war in Ukraine goes on, every day that the bombs rain from above, every time another school goes up in flames, and every bullet that takes a parent away, another Natasha's heart fills with sadness. 100 hearts sad, and the night stays black.
India Today reporters have been on ground relentlessly bringing us all the updates. Gaurav Sawant, who went through the length and breadth of the war-torn country of Ukraine from Kyiv, currently that's being captured by Russia, takes us through a ground report there where a building was attacked by Russian forces. Let's have a look.
Thick plumes of smoke rising from a building here in Ukrainian capital Kyiv, not far from an airfield here. It is being said that there was not just an air defense system, but also certain other offices. And you can hear more blasts that are taking place. We are moving away from this area. We are being told to leave this area because it's not safe to be here. You can hear some blasts that are taking place in this area. There was still some time back, there was some kind of sound. There was some kinds of sound where people were being asked to move away from this locality. Why was this building targeted? We are trying to get more details, but one of the officials who was present here seemed to indicate that this is where they had some systems to protect the skies around Kyiv, which means surface-to-air missiles were located in this area. We'll try and get more information on the systematic targeting of the capital Kyiv. We have also been told that while there has been no loss of life, at least in this blast, but certain other blasts, certain other areas are being vacated even as we speak, as Kyiv braces for an imminent attack over the next 24 to 48 hours. With cameraman Pavan Kumar reporting from Ground Zero, Kyiv, Ukraine, Gaurav Sawant for India Today. We are at the Hostomel Air Base, and this is from the cradle to the grave. This is Mriya AN-225, the biggest aircraft ever to fly. You can actually feel the pain when you look at this aircraft. The biggest aircraft, Soviet era engineering marvel, 6 engines, 3 on this side, 3 on that side, and this aircraft literally cut into half by a massive missile strike that took place. We are at the Hostomel Air Base. There is a lot of unexploded cargo here at this point of time. But just for size, this is a strategic lift transport aircraft, the biggest of such aircraft ever to be built. And this aircraft now just lies, it's shattered. Just compare this size and those small aircraft standing there. You can just compare the size of these two aircraft and you can make out. Russia tried to capture this many times. They launched their Spetsnaz, their special forces at this airfield, and they did not. Initially they succeeded, then they failed in counterattacks. Look at the anti-aircraft, tracked anti-aircraft guns here, tracked anti-aircraft guns here, the S-300 system there, the tanks that are parked there, the missile tubes of the S-300 there, the anti-aircraft system here, all burnt, all burnt. This is the hangar, this is the main hangar of Mriya. The number of missiles and rockets fired, it's like pockmarked. This complete place is pockmarked with the rocket strikes, missile strikes, airburst, cargo, bomblets. This place littered with ammunition and a lot of unexploded ammunition also in this place. This actually, the pride of Ukraine, the pride of Soviet Union at one point of time, Mriya AN-225, it's now just, it's cut into half, broken in 2 parts. India's AN-32 transport fighters, the strategic short takeoff aircraft that we require for Siachen, for Leh, for the northeast. They are all manufactured here at this Hostomel Air Base, at the Antonov Air Base. Some of them were here for retrofitting. They had to be rushed out. Some others need to come in for retrofitting and avionics and upgrades. They cannot come here anymore because this entire airbase has been shelled to bits. The hangar there, the building there, the hangars there, the aircraft that was standing there, they are all now perhaps damaged forever. This place is littered with so many bombs and bomblets that it will take months. We spoke to a Ukraine army officer with whom we've come to this place, and the engineers will take at least a month to clear this place before they can make it operational again. Now, the Russians wanted to occupy this airbase because they wanted to use this as the staging camp to launch future operations into Kyiv. They wanted an airbase very close to Kyiv, and they launched their special forces here. Remember that image just when the conflict had started of multiple helicopters coming into Kyiv and flying very low and landing here? Those were the helicopters that launched the special forces and brought them right to this point. And this is where the Ukrainians launched a very swift counter-attack. We also spoke to a special forces officer who's here. Of course, he spoke to us off camera, but he explained how they fought tooth and nail, and there's massive damage. We'll show you reports of the damage that's been caused to entire Hostomel. There's not one building that's standing there undamaged at this point of time. Street by street fighting took place before the Russians were pushed back, and once again the Ukrainians now control this territory after the Russians withdrew.
Now, cutting across to Rajesh Pawar, India Today correspondent, who's currently live with us from Kyiv. We also have Geeta Mohan joining us from the newsroom, tracking those developments. Rajesh, over to you. At this point, as much as the Western world claimed that Russia was just possibly muscle flexing, would not go on to invade to such an extent, here we're looking at all indicators that this war could possibly go on for much longer than expected. 100 days of this war today. What's the fallout as you see widely around you?
Very true, Nabila. This war will continue, but it all looks like will probably for months, maybe the whole year it might continue. The way weapons and other military equipment is pouring in from US and from NATO allies, this war will continue as long as these weapon supply continues. As far as ground situation is concerned, we know Russia is in now firm control of almost entire Donbass. There was this big city, Severodonetsk, which was the biggest city in Donbass, which was still under Ukrainian control till about a week back, now is firmly under Russian control. So now Russia's control over entire Donbass territory, entire Kherson province, and of course Crimea, they already had the full control, is complete almost now. So it looks like that the objectives on the ground have been largely met. But Ukrainians are launching counterattacks, especially in Kharkiv region. And in the coming days, when they get these more modern equipments, especially this MQIC Grey Eagle combat drone, which America is now proposing to give to Ukraine, that will enhance their capabilities multifold. And that is time we will see with this long-range artillery coming in, which America has promised to give to Ukraine. We will see further escalation of this conflict here, and probably there will be more counterattacks from Ukrainian side in coming days. Nabila.
Right. You know, Rajesh, please do stay with us. At this point, when we spoke about the kind of sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, one would really imagine that Russia would not be strong enough to forge ahead in this war, but it appears it has. But to give our viewers a slight insight into what kind of sanctions has been imposed on Russia at this point across the West, here's a look. Akshita brings us more.
Soon after Putin announced his intention of declaring war on Ukraine, here's how several countries decided to take on the Russian president. You had sanctions galore being imposed on Russia, US leading that list with 1,144 sanctions. These were economic, trade sanctions imposed on Russia. The United Kingdom followed suit with 964 sanctions in all being imposed against Russia. And we're talking about some of these sanctions being imposed just a few days ago. Switzerland imposed 888 sanctions, Australia 840. The European Union issued 755 sanctions. They continue, however, to import oil from Russia. Belgium has imposed 755 sanctions, Japan at 465, Poland at 17. You notice that many of these countries are allies of the United States and cracked the whip soon after America did. All of these sanctions have been imposed. It hasn't deterred Putin or his war games because 100 days on, the conflict still continues on the ground.
Well, Geeta, who's been tracking those developments, Geeta, you yourself, you were in Ukraine, in Russia as well. You've got a quick understanding or a full understanding of what the sentiments lie on both ends. At this point, when sanctions have been leveled on Russia to this magnitude, it seems like they still are mustering the courage and going right ahead into this war 100 days on. Where is the money coming from? Are they able to sustain? Will they be able to meet their goal as per their plan? How do you foresee this and where do you foresee this going?
Right. Well, Nabila, it is a very important question because one has to also see whether if Russia can sustain the sanctions or not, can sustain despite the continued and harsh sanctions. There's now a new set of sanctions that have been announced, and we'll have to wait and see how that really plays out for Russia. But the important thing is Russia is not a country that is unknown to sanctions. They know how to handle sanctions. They have been one of the most sanctioned countries for very many years now, and therefore while this time around the sanctions are different and very harsh, that Russian dollars have also been frozen and international trading has become mighty difficult. Russian domestic economy has always remained rather insulated when it comes to sustenance and managing without disruption of supplies. Also remember, Russia does have China when it comes to supplies that they require. They're still doing business with India as well. So a lot of insulation for the domestic economy, but that does not take away from the fact that there is inflation in Russia and people are feeling the pinch. They're feeling the pinch of inflation. But what Putin has done very smartly is keeping the basic food prices at a very contained level, and there has been no real price rise when it comes to basic food items. Apart from that, when it comes to trading, businesses have been impacted. People have not been able to get their orders that they had, or industries have not been able to function. So there is a lot of problem, but how long will it take for a resolution? If the 3 months or 3 or 4 months that we are looking at is a time period that Putin can sustain, Nabila, then winters would set in. In that, we'll again have to wait and see whether if Europe can then manage their energy needs without Russian gas and oil. Remember, there is a carve-out for pipeline gas because so many of the European countries, despite EU saying we're going to ban Russian gas, have said we're okay banning the seaborne gas and oil that comes, but we're not okay completely doing away with the pipeline gas. So a carve-out for the pipeline gas now has come into place. So there is a lot of layers when it comes to how Europe is really going to handle and tackle the energy crisis. Food supply and wheat shortage is also something. Now we know that the West is saying that Russia is blocking all the wheat, but we also know that the Black Sea and Sea of Azov have been mined. They were mined by Ukrainian forces as part of military strategy. Demining operations have been underway, and Rajesh only a week ago reported that Mariupol port alone has been demined, but that does not mean that the waters are safe for ships to take off. So it is not Russia just blocking wheat. It is also the fact that these waters are not usable as of now, which clearly the West does not want to spell out or look at.
You know, stay with us, Geeta. At this point, as we see this war, even though it started slow, has managed to succeed on at least 100 days and counting. And that's what we see as per all the indicators, that this is a long haul that one needs to be prepared for. And that's what the world seems to be bracing for as well. The 3rd June marks 100 days of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Since 24th February, Russia has been globally isolated, sanctioned, barred and cornered entirely. But despite that crippling sanctions, Russian gas, oil export, all of that, braving it, in fact, President Vladimir Putin's trump card. He's managed to use his oil and gas as his biggest ammunition. But then on the last day of May, the European Union has agreed to ban the overwhelming majority of the Russian oil imports, now possibly resulting in a further setback for Russia. Let me cut across to Siddharth Zarabi, who's joining us.
We started with coal. Yesterday, in the middle of the night, we decided then to have a ban now on de facto 90% of Russian oil imports to the European Union by the end of the year.
All right, so that's Zarabi joining us from Business Today, giving us an understanding on how Russia intends to continue with this war and where is that money influx really coming from. Siddharth, February 24th, when the war really began, in fact, Russia has been bombarded with enough and more sanctions, completely cornered economically. But despite those crippling sanctions, it appears that the Russian gas and oil exports were really the strong point for Vladimir Putin. He used that as his trump card. But now this comes as a setback possibly for them after European Union has decided to ban this overwhelming majority of Russian oil imports. How would you look at this?
Well, you know, the European Union's ban is not something akin to a tap being shut off immediately. This will take time to play out because we know the importance of Russian oil and gas as far as prices and inflation are concerned for energy in the entire European Union. I think the broader consequences have already been felt, Nabila. We are now living in a world which has never for decades now seen this kind of inflation. Turkey, for which the data for the month of May has just come out, has recorded inflation of close to 75%. And I was looking at a chart just a little while back where Russia's inflation till some time ago was 18%. But now if you add Turkey to the mix, you will realize that inflation, including in the United States of America, where food price inflation used to be most benign, and one of the things that was not expensive along with gas motor gas in the US used to be food. You are now seeing US witness very high food price inflation. In the United Kingdom, fish and chip shops have shut down because they are not able to deal with the surge in prices of flour, of fish, as well as cooking oils. And you know the situation in India. More than 2/3 of the advanced economies in the world are seeing inflation at decade highs. The developing world is also suffering, and because a larger part of the world's poor live in the developing world, the impact is very high. The moot point in response to your question really is, as far as Russia is concerned, I think it has been hurt lesser. And I say this with caution, it has been hurt lesser in economic terms than the rest of the world. And the Russian currency has managed to hold on. And I suspect that in this latest move by the European Union, once we go through the fine print, we will find things which may lead us to the conclusion, a better, more refined conclusion, that this ban may not prove to be the kind that many of us are expecting outside. And a final point, Nabila, I think the economic consequences of 2 years of the COVID pandemic and the massive amount of liquidity that advanced economies threw into their economies to prevent the slowdown, plus the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the consequent inflation, is now the single biggest concern for the world. The war may end in God knows how many days or weeks or months. No one can predict that except Mr. Putin himself, perhaps. But the lingering consequences in economic terms are going to be felt and are already being felt across the world, Nabila.
Right. You know, when we speak of wheat and the kind of impact that it's had, could you elaborate for us, how is there going to be a phase of recovery and how soon could we be looking at that?
If I heard you right, did you you asked me about wheat specifically, Nabila?
Yes. Yes, Siddharth, go on. All right, I'm going to shift our
Nabila,
focus.
I don't.
Right, Siddharth.
Nabila, yeah, go ahead, please. I couldn't hear you. I lost your audio.
That's fine. That's fine. But stay with us. If I can move over to Rajesh for a quick word on that. Rajesh, at this point, like Siddharth very rightly mentioned, it seems like Russia could be possibly limping while carrying out this war at this point. But somehow it appears that despite all the aspersions cast on Putin, his well-being, whether Russia is fit or not, it seems like their goal, they're mighty focused on their goal and to succeed with it. And that's what it appears with the Russian military now soon approaching the eastern region of Ukraine. And they seem to be doing it as per plan, very well laid out. What are you looking at in terms of the areas that could soon be captured along Ukraine, east of Ukraine particularly?
Look, Nabila, I will just add on to what Siddharth was saying.
Yeah.
From Russian sources, what input is coming regarding economics, these sanctions seems to have backfired badly on the rest of the world. About inflation, what Siddharth was talking, Russia has witnessed minimum inflation amongst all the countries in Europe. Estonia had inflation as high as 18 to 20%. And as far as Russian ruble is concerned, it has been the best performing currency in the world in the last 2 months. And Russia has got up to $383 billion of exports of gas and oil in the last 3 months. So somehow, as far as these sanctions are concerned, they don't seem to be affecting Russia so much as they have been affecting Europe and the rest of the world. Now, coming to military situation, as I said, the biggest town in Donbas area, which was under Ukrainian control, which was Severodonetsk, is already captured by the Russian forces. This is the second biggest victory Russians have achieved after Mariupol. And it was yesterday when they announced that they had the full control of this last town in Donbas, which was under Ukrainian control. As far as the situation in southeast of Ukraine is concerned, in Kherson, Zaporozhye, and that area, there the front lines are more or less frozen now. None of the sides have been able to make much advance till now. But with these new weapons coming, long range, multi-barrel rockets and artillery coming to Ukraine, which America has announced now. Also, these drones, which are MQIC Grey Eagle drones, situation is likely to change a lot. With the acquisition of these weapons, when they reach the front lines, Ukraine will have a much better offensive capability and will have the capability even to strike inside the territory of Russian Federation. A guarantee which America has sought from Ukraine that they will not use these weapon systems to hit any target inside Russian territory, which I think Ukraine will not be able to give, and it is likely to be used someday or the other inside the Russian territory, which has a potential then to escalate this whole conflict into a much bigger level, to a much bigger area. Nabila.
Right. Tossing that back to Siddharth Zarabi. Siddharth, now, if you could hear me right, I did specifically ask about the wheat crisis, which is, sparking a huge concern, not just in India, but across the globe. Is there any point of recovery that we could be looking at? We're looking at a global food crisis itself because of this.
That's a very good point, Nabila. And I think one of the biggest decisions that was taken by India, effective the 13th of May, was to announce an indefinite ban on wheat exports. Now, wheat being very crucial for our own food security, it has had a global impact. There were some noises made overseas as well by some countries that this may perhaps not, this food nationalism, as someone chose to describe it, may not be good. But, there is really no alternative for a country like India. You know what Indonesia chose to do with palm oil, for example. Currently, the biggest factor that has played out and was completely unexpected. When we went into COVID, there was scarcity of health materials to deal with the COVID crisis. Coming out of the pandemic, factories started working extra to meet lingering demand. No one really expected the entire global economy to turn on its head in the last 100 days. Yeah. So that's why I say the biggest black swan event, and we have had a series of them starting with the COVID pandemic, has been Russia's rather unexpected invasion of Ukraine and Ukraine's own position as a large commodity supplier. Let me just give you one more example of how the economic consequences of this war are greater than the military or strategic consequences. I'm just seeing what External Affairs Minister Mr. Jaishankar is being quoted as having said a little while earlier today that Europe believes that its problems are the problems of the world. The fact is that the problems in Ukraine are now visiting hapless people in India. $1 billion worth of sunflower oil exports had happened last year to India. When you take that out of the mix, as has happened, it completely sends everything topsy-turvy. So wheat, Nabila, that you asked me is just one of the things which is important. The economic consequences in terms of shortage of supplies, uncertainty about future supplies, profiteering, hoarding, and the natural increase in prices is a dynamic that I argue once again will continue to play out for months. And what it will mean as second and third round effects is that fuel being more expensive, your housing loan, your car loan becoming more expensive. And these are the consequences that we are paying. Just like the climate crisis visits everyone, similarly, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is also touching the life of India's poor, not just the rich, in fact, more the poor, Nabila.
Siddharth, thank you very much. Really appreciate those inputs on that. Now, cutting across to Geeta Mohan. In fact, Geeta was in Ukraine. She has been reporting on ground relentlessly for so long as the war continued. From ground zero brings us some of the faces of the Russian invasion of Ukraine through these images. In fact, Geeta Mohan got this exclusive report from on ground, pictures from the Donetsk region particularly. Here's our exclusive report right from the month of March.
Massive shelling, massive operation over here in Elyanka. You can see there, smoke still billowing. This entire camp was attacked. It had a lot of tanks, armored vehicles, Ural trucks, and artillery carrier vehicles as well. Has been attacked. So officers over here trying to now assess the situation. They're trying to retrieve all the armored vehicles, artillery carriers and tanks as soon as they can and save as many as they can. But if you see over here, the situation pretty bad. The forces have moved out of here and they're trying to retrieve as many as they can. This is also a base camp where captured Ukrainian tanks and armored vehicles were brought in and then were sent for repair and then to be reused. So a very important camp over here has come under Ukrainian attack. I'm being joined by Officer Ilya, who will explain what really happened over here and how are they trying to contain the Ukrainian forces.
Дальнейшие наши действия идти вперед и только вперед, не останавливаясь. Занимать непосредственно, возвращать.
The only action he is planning now, he knows that we're gonna continue to push and taking back our grounds, which is must be under Republic control.
So ask him how many Ukrainian soldiers were they? This was his force, his team. How many Ukrainian soldiers did his team capture?
Есть у вас вообще за время операции были украинские пленные у вас?
Да, были много десятков, потому что наш полк уже порядка.
So they took around 17 villages and small.
Надо прекращать.
Okay, let's stop it.
Thank you, sir. We're here in Volvanaka, a city absolutely destroyed. Irina is a resident. Irina, tell us your experience of what really happened over here. You're living over here 24th of Feb.
From 24 to 10-12 of month. It was very horrible. What else? A lot of жертвы. A lot of victims, childs, old people, young people.
Lost their lives. How many people left Volvanaka after the attacks? Did they leave the city?
Some lived, but returned, partly returned, and I think now from 5 to 10 thousands.
People are back?
Yes.
Why? The city is destroyed. There is no life right now in the city. Why are you returning?
Because it's my home. I had here work. I had my house, but some partly destroyed, and I think.
You want to rebuild it again, I guess.
But no, so soon as we want.
Major evacuation operation being undertaken over here in Volvanaka. The people over here will be evacuated to camps in Dokuchayevsk, which is a city not very far from here, only to ensure that they're in a safe place, have food, have shelter till the time the city in all probability is reconstructed. So there is a process in place. People's names are put on a list, and those whose names are on the list are taken by buses. A destroyed city that requires humanitarian aid and food. The queue that you see over here are of people of Volvanaka who have queued up to receive their daily bread. This is a van that has come to distribute bread to the people of Volvanaka. There are various other vans that come with other food items, but food is scarce. There is no gas and electricity in Volvanaka, and water also becoming rather scarce in the town. So they're using it with really economically. Administration trying to ensure that at least there's some help that is provided to the people of Volvanaka who've decided to stay on and not leave the town. So this is the first day we have arrived, so have the people from Donetsk. Food for Life is now going to provide food every day. But how difficult was it, if you could ask this gentleman over here, how difficult was it for the days when this food was not being provided?
Тяжело очень было, очень.
It was very hard, he said.
How are they managing food then?
Как вы справлялись? Откуда брали еду?
Ну, запасы, которые бы оставались, вот, те запасы и ели.
So they used supplies they had and share it between each other.
The irony of the conflict today. What you see behind me is called Red Square, taken after the Red Square in Moscow in Russia. Many people over here are still pro-Russia despite the destruction that their city has witnessed. And unfortunately, this Red Square has also fallen victim to the latest conflict. But the people over here say that in 2014-2015, they consider themselves part of Donetsk. And once it was taken over by Ukraine in the 2014-2015 conflict, the statue of Lenin was taken down on the other side, and today we see that the Red Square also no longer stands. When did this food start coming to the city?
From 2 weeks ago, maybe even earlier, I don't remember.
Are you a student?
Yeah. Student from Kyiv University, Kyiv National University, HPI.
You see destruction everywhere. Are you angry that your city is destroyed?
That's hard to explain, but it's war. It can be rebuilt from. It took years maybe, but it will be rebuilt, I hope so.
почти с того света вытянули. Спасибо, спасибо людям в белых халатах. Низкие поклоны. С Докучаевска. Очень благодарю. Очень.
Her son, her husband was evacuated to Dokuchayevsk, and he was saved by doctors there. So she's saying thanks, big thanks from her to doctors who saved his husband's life.
The extent of damage over here shows what really happened in Volvanaka. This is a BMP-2 destroyed, homes bombed, shelling marks on the walls. To take Volvanaka, it took a lot of fight between the Ukrainian forces and the Russian forces. Homes over there, school, absolutely destroyed, bombed. This again is a city that bears a deserted look. But there are still a lot of people who are not going to leave the city of Volvanaka. They're determined to stay here to rebuild the city. Many others who have no place to go. And then there are those who have already left Volvanaka. With video journalist Satya Rautre in Volvanaka, Geeta Mohan for India Today.
Geeta Mohan, who joins us live right here from our newsroom. Geeta, we saw your reports and the kind of the trauma that many of those people, the locals, have gone through at that point, are still facing the same. It really leaves us heartbroken to see where what their plight would be next. What's the alternative for them? At this point, we also know that Zelensky has said literally hundreds of soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, are dropping dead on a daily basis. There are casualties reported on a daily basis, but there is no proper count to it. Is there a finger that we can point to say that these many deaths have occurred? Any agency who is surveying this?
Well, there is no way that we can get an exact count of the deaths and loss of life in both sides, whether if it is the Donbas region or, for that matter, captured territories of Ukraine, which are now under Russian control. The fact of the matter is that there has been a huge number of a huge amount of destruction and loss of life. But again, when you speak to the people over there, there is a realization that the solution to this entire crisis is a political one, that the leadership will have to decide whether they're going to go back to the negotiating table and look for or seek a solution to this entire crisis and end the war. Only then can people return to normal life and to peace, which again will be one that they will have to wait for a very long time. In the visuals that we showed you, the reports that we brought, Nabila, it is very clear that these cities will take a long time to rebuild, to be rebuilt, and for the next generation to even think of a future ahead when you have neighbors that are not friends anymore, more like enemies.
Right, Geeta, stay with us. We had Gaurav, who was on ground, bringing us all the kind of the devastation, rampant devastation in various parts of Ukraine, especially Irpin, where he was, bringing us this exclusive ground report. Let's cut across.
Fierce fighting is being reported right now in Irpin and in Bucha. The situation is extremely grim. The Russians seem to be advancing, and that is why this area is being evacuated. If you notice, only military personnel here in this Irpin-Bucha belt here in Ukraine. But hold on. Be very careful, Pawan, very careful. These are anti-tank mines that are laid on the road here. So now you can make out how dangerous the situation is. My camera person Pawan was very close to these anti-tank mines that have been placed here. In some areas, you also have anti-personnel mines that have been deployed. Now, we have been told that there are anti-personnel mines and anti-tank mines in this area. Emergency vehicles are rushing in. Because they're trying to bring as many people as they can out of this firing area. There is firing going on right now in Irpin and Bucha. The firing is fierce. You can hear the artillery shelling that is on at this point of time. Now, beyond this point, we are told that since yesterday, there was fierce fighting on. After that fierce fighting, the Russians are advancing, and as far as the Ukrainian army is concerned, they are on the second strategic block. So the effort is to stall the advance of the Russians at every barricade, at every picket. Camera person Pawan Kumar and I are trying to show you these houses have now been completely evacuated. All these houses have now been evacuated. There are no civilians in this area. there is the Ukrainian army, there is the Ukrainian militia, and there are those ambulances which are bringing back those who have been injured in this area. We are slowly trying to inch forward to get you more on this big story. Now, we've been told that it's very unsafe. You saw the anti-tank mines that have been laid. Those anti-tank mines are all over. There are those obstacles that have been laid here. There are anti-personnel mines, and it snowed very heavily in this area. Now, because of that snow, the advance was stalled as some of the tanks were on the anti-personnel mines. This is the Ukrainian army that is still holding on to this defense of the capital Kyiv. With cameraman Pawan Kumar on the Irpin-Bucha axis in Ukraine, Gaurav Sawant for India Today. The broken bridge and broken lives. Now a desperate attempt being made to rescue senior citizens. Easier said than done. An effort is being made to rescue these people from this broken bridge. Now this place in the Bucha district in Irpin is directly in the line of Russian fire, and people are desperately trying to come out. This bridge is shattered. That car, that van you can see shattered, but people desperately trying to flee this war zone. And this shows the hardships of war here. On India Today, we are showing you ground realities here on the outskirts of Kyiv. In fact, this is a very crucial bridge to enter Kyiv, and this bridge has been blown up so that the Russian forces are stalled. While the Russians may have their bridge-laying tanks, but getting those tanks in position here or finding another easier access to Kyiv will stall their advance. And this has given time to the Ukrainian forces to be able to bring their anti-tank guided missiles to be able to take on the Russian forces the moment they bunch up. But the fighting is extremely fierce here. You can hear shelling in the backdrop, and hundreds and hundreds of people are fleeing this battleground. They're fleeing the war zone. There are ambulances to take them back. Injured soldiers, incidentally, are also being brought by the same route. But the bigger challenge is to evacuate senior citizens and prepare for the defense of Kyiv. Extremely tough in the days ahead. Right now, the aim is to withdraw to a position from where Kyiv can be better defended. This is now a full-scale military operation, and the hours and days ahead will be extremely crucial in deciding whether the Ukrainian forces are able to defend Kyiv and for how long. With cameraman Pawan Kumar in the Bucha district, Ukraine, Gaurav Sawant for India Today.
All right, here's some big news coming in. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, in his interaction at a global summit in Slovakia, has slammed the EU for its myopic view on global interest. Europe has to, in fact, he says, and I quote, Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but world's problems is not Europe's problem. This is exactly what the External Affairs Minister of India, S. Jaishankar, had to say. Let's have a listen what he said while slamming the EU.
Again, Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems. That if it is you, it's yours. If it is me, it's ours. I think that's something, and I see, reflections of that. Again, in terms of there is a linkage today which is being made. A linkage between China and India and what's happening in Ukraine. So come on, guys. I mean, China and India happened way before anything happened in Ukraine. So the Chinese don't need a precedent somewhere else in the world on how to, engage us or not engage us, or be difficult with us or not be difficult with us. So as I said, I just see this as frankly a not very clever argument. A very self-serving one.
All right, those are very strongly worded statement given out by External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar. S. Jaishankar, in his interaction at a global summit in Slovakia, has slammed the EU for its myopic view of global interest. He says, and I quote, Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but world's problem is not Europe's problem. This is the reflection that he sees with the way EU has been presenting itself and speaking On these lines, as Jaishankar says, it's about time that EU rectifies its vision or its narrative. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, as he has an interaction at a global summit in Slovakia, has slammed the EU for its myopic views of global interest. He says very sternly and curtly that Europe has to now grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems and the world's problem is not Europe's problem. This is what S. Jaishankar says, that he sees increasingly reflections of that coming out of European Union at this point. Remember, S. Jaishankar has been quite stern on India's stance when it comes to several issues, including the Ukraine war. At this point, the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar pointing fingers at the EU outrightly while he speaks at a global summit in Slovakia, has said very clearly, asking European Union to grow out of their myopic view on global interest, says that Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are world's problems, but world's problem is not Europe's problem. Now, it's been 100 days since the war began in Ukraine. It has turned out to be the deadliest war of Europe in decades now. Here's a quick look to these 100 days of war.
It all started with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's appeal to US President Joe Biden to grant his country's entry to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. It was January 2022. 2 months before this appeal, satellite images taken by US company Maxar Technologies showed ongoing buildup of Russian forces near Ukraine. The troop deployment soon surpassed the strength of 100,000. That was November 2021. Within a month, on 17 December, Russia presented security demands including that NATO pull back troops and weapons from Eastern Europe and bar Ukraine from ever joining it. Within a month, when Zelensky appealed for NATO membership, it provided the so-called legitimacy to what Russian president was about to do. When questioned about Russian troop deployment in Belarus, Kremlin replied, saying it was routine training exercise. On 24 January, NATO put its forces on standby and reinforced Eastern Europe with more ships and fighter jets. 2 days later, Washington responded to Russia's security demands. It repeated a commitment to NATO's open-door policy while offering a pragmatic evaluation of Moscow's concern. It did not pacify Russia. It claimed that its demands were not addressed. As January turned to February, the United States of America announced that it would send 3,000 extra troops to Poland and Romania, the bordering countries of Ukraine and Russia, but none of the NATO allies would send troops to Ukraine. Instead, they warned Russia of several economic sanctions if it was to act militarily against Ukraine. The stage was set and the ball started to roll. 21st February 2022. Russian president in a televised address said that Ukraine was an integral part of its history and that it was run by a puppet regime manipulated by external foreign powers. Vladimir Putin recognized the two breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk, as sovereign republics and marched his peacekeeping troops into the region. 22nd February 2022. The US, UK and their allies declared sanctions on Russian parliament members, banks and other assets in response to Putin's troop order. Germany halted the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline project. 23rd February 2022. Russian-backed separatist leaders of Donetsk and Luhansk in East Ukraine asked Russia for help to repel aggression from the Ukrainian army. 24th February 2022. Russian President Vladimir Putin authorized a special military operation in Ukraine. Russian forces began missile and artillery attacks, striking major Ukrainian cities, including the capital city of Kyiv. Putin in his broadcast justified his special military operation as an attempt to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Ukrainian President Zelensky responded with a tweet saying that Russia had embarked on a path of evil, but Ukraine is defending itself. And that was day one of this war. 1st March 2022. A mile-long Russian armored column leading up to the capital city of Kyiv is found beset by logistical problems. Russia hits a TV tower in Kyiv and intensifies its long-range bombardment of Kharkiv in the northeast and other cities. 2nd March 2022. Russian forces start a siege of the southern eastern port of Mariupol. It is considered vital to Moscow's attempts to link the eastern Donbas region with Crimea. Russia annexed the Black Sea Peninsula in 2014. Its troops entered and captured the Black Sea port of Kherson. It became the first large Ukrainian urban center captured by Russia. 1 million people fled Ukraine as the war intensified and dragged on. 4th March 2022. Russian forces seized Europe's biggest nuclear plant, Zaporizhzhia, the very day NATO rejected Ukraine's appeal for no-fly zone. They said this appeal could escalate the conflict further. 8th March 2022. On the first ever attempt to create a humanitarian corridor, Ukrainians fled the northeastern city of Sumy. UNHCR estimated 2 million people fled Ukraine in the first 13 days of the war. 9th March 2022. Ukraine accused Russia of bombing a maternity hospital in Mariupol. It buried people in the rubble. Russia countered, saying that Ukrainian fighters were occupying the building and not them. 13th March 2022. Russia extended its penetration deep into western Ukraine. It fired missiles at a base near the border with NATO member Poland. 16th March 2022. Ukraine accused Russia of bombing Mariupol theatre, where hundreds of civilians had taken shelter. Moscow denied it. 25th March 2022. Moscow signaled a shift in focus to making gains in the east, while Ukrainian forces pressed to recapture towns outside Kyiv. US President Joe Biden visited a refugee camp of Ukrainians in Poland. Standing mere 60 miles from the Ukrainian border, he said that Russian President Vladimir Putin cannot remain in power. The US administration later clarified that President Biden wasn't calling for a regime change in Moscow. 30th March 2022. UNHCR announced that more than 4 million people fled Ukraine in the first month of the war. April 2022. Ukraine accused Russia of war crimes after a mass grave and bodies of people shot at close range were found in the recaptured town of Bucha near the capital city of Kyiv. Kremlin denied responsibility and said the images of bodies were staged. 8th April 2022. Ukraine blamed Russia for a missile attack on a train station that killed at least 52 people. The train was reportedly carrying people fleeing the looming eastern offensive. Moscow denied the charge. 14th April 2022. The spearhead Russian naval attack in the Black Sea, the Moskva sinks. Ukraine claims that its missile strike caused Moskva to sink. Russia blamed an ammunition explosion as the cause. 18th April 2022. Russia launches a campaign to seize 2 provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk. Ukraine describes it as the Battle of Donbas. 21st April 2022. Putin declares Mariupol liberated after nearly 2 months of siege. However, hundreds of Ukrainian defenders hold out inside the city's huge Azovstal steelworks. 25th April 2022. Ukrainian neighbor country Moldova's pro-Russian breakaway region says blasts hit one of its ministries and 2 radio masts. It blamed Ukraine. In response, Kyiv accused Moscow of staging the attacks to try to widen the conflict. 28th April 2022. Ukraine blamed Russia for firing 2 missiles into Kyiv during a visit by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Kremlin accused Ukraine of attacking Russian regions near the border. 1st May 2022. About 100 Ukrainian civilians are evacuated from Mariupol's ruined Azovstal steelworks. The United Nations calls it a safe passage operation. 7th May 2022. As many as 60 people were killed after a bomb strikes a village school in eastern Ukraine. 9th May 2022. Putin exhorts Russians to battle in a defiant Victory Day speech, but he remains silent about plans for any further military escalation in Ukraine. 10th May 2022. Ukraine says its forces have recaptured villages north and northeast of Kharkiv in a counter-offensive. 12th May 2022. UNHRC announced that more than 6 million people have fled Ukraine in 77 days of ongoing war. 14 May 2022. Ukrainian forces launched a counter-offensive near the eastern Russian-held town of Izium. 18 May 2022. On the 83rd day of the war, 2 Nordic countries, Finland and Sweden, applied to join NATO. 20th May 2022. Ukraine's President Zelensky asked his military defenders to get out of Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol and save their lives. Few hours later, Russia announced the last of Ukrainian fighters holding out at Mariupol's Azovstal steelworks have surrendered. 21st May 2022. Russia launches an offensive in one of the Donbas provinces to push Ukraine away from Luhansk. 23rd May 2022. A young Russian tank commander is sentenced to life in prison for killing an unarmed civilian in the first war crimes trial of the conflict by a court on Kyiv. 25th May 2022. Putin signed a decree that simplified the process for residents of newly captured districts of Ukraine to acquire Russian citizenship and passports in a bid to solidify Moscow's grip on the seized territory. 29 May 2022. As Russian forces appear close to seizing the entire Luhansk region after days of slow but steady gains, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov calls the liberation of Donbas an unconditional priority for Moscow. 31st May 2022. Local officials announce it is no longer possible to evacuate trapped civilians. Ukrainian forces are still holding out, but much of the city is under Russian control. 1st June 2022. Russia criticizes US decision to supply advanced rocket systems to Ukraine, warning it could widen the conflict and increase the risk of direct confrontation with Washington. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Ukraine had given assurances it will not use the systems against targets on Russian territory.
All right, as the world questions India's stance on the Ukraine war, here we have External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar in his interaction at the Global Summit in Slovakia, who slammed the EU for its myopic view on global interest. He says, and I quote, "Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but world's problem is not Europe's problem," says External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar when asked about whether India is seated on the fence when it comes to taking a stance on the Ukraine war. Let's hear it from S. Jaishankar.
Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems. That if it is you, it's yours. If it is me, it's ours. I think that's something, and I see, reflections of that. Again, in terms of, there is a linkage today which is being made. A linkage between China and India and what's happening in Ukraine. So come on, guys. I mean, China and India happened way before anything happened in Ukraine. So the Chinese don't need a precedent somewhere else in the world on how to, engage us or not engage us, or be difficult with us or not be difficult with us. So, as I said, I just see this as frankly a not very clever argument, a very self-serving one.
All right, I'm going to quickly cut across to Paulami Saho joining us live for more updates on this. Paulami, over to you on S. Jaishankar and his very strongly worded message to the EU when asked about whether India is sitting on the fence when it comes to taking a stance on this Russia-Ukraine war. He certainly slammed the European Union for its myopic views of India and, of course, on global issues. Take us through further on what was the relevance and context of this statement.
Well, that is, of course, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar not mincing words over there. Not the first time, really, that he has, in fact, categorically stated that India's position on the Russia-Ukraine war will be driven by India's interests alone, and we will not come under any kind of pressure. Yes, we have maintained this categorically, publicly, on international fora as well, including the United Nations, that we do not support the hostilities and the violence that Russia is, in fact, imposing upon Ukraine without naming countries over there. We do not support it. We do believe both countries need to come to the dialogue table and find a resolution to this conflict. But to in fact browbeat India into taking some sort of position this way or that way is not going to be the way India will function or work. This is something that he's made quite clear previously as well when he went to Washington DC in April for the 2+2 dialogue as well, because there were several questions that were being asked. Those questions were asked even when there were foreign dignitaries visiting India back to back, including the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov as well, from the US, from the UK as well. They all visited India off the back of the conflict which had just begun at that point of time, and were trying to impose upon India to take some sort of a stated decision against Russia, to call out Russia, and then of course not take any sort of buy any sort of oil from Russia, for instance, as well. And we said that the percentage of oil that we buy from Russia is hardly anything in comparison to what Europe buys from Russia in a single day. So that is how the External Affairs Minister has categorically stated his position, and now many foreign countries, Western countries, have come around to accepting that India's position is obviously going to be driven by India's national interests. And while we do not support any kind of conflict, war or hostilities, we will of course not be browbeaten into taking any sort of stand with this axis or that axis. Are you part of this axis or that axis? That was also one of the questions that was asked at the fora where he was, and he said you cannot do that. We are a country which represents 1/5 of the world's population at this point of time in terms of economy, probably the 5th of the 6th largest economy. So we will of course take our cause in our own best interest, and that's how it's going to be.
S. Jaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister, has been very stern when it comes to India's stance, and that does not mean taking a side. Abhishek Bala joining us for more on that. Abhishek, S. Jaishankar, very like him to say something like that. He's in fact slammed the EU, saying that not all your problem is the world's problem. So, learn to look at the larger overview, a larger picture of the situation at this point. How, in your view, how has India positioned itself when it comes to this war? As we know, long association that India has had with Russia. At the same time, India has never approved of any kind of violence or endorsed war.
Well, Nabila, if you look at India's stand, it's been consistent. Taking a neutral stand is taking a decision. It doesn't mean that you are pro-Ukraine or anti-Russia or vice versa. So from the onset of the war, or even even before the war started, India's stand was very clear that sovereignty of a nation should be respected. So if one is to read between the lines, it was quite clear that India is against any kind of an invasion or any kind of high escalation as this war has taken shape now. But when it comes to India's interests, then obviously India will gauge the situation and take decisions as and when required. It doesn't need to be sort of dictated by any Western country on what India's stand should be. And this is something, in fact, that Ukraine has also, respected. While I was in Ukraine, while civilians, expected India to take a stand against Russia, but there was also an understanding that, India has its own interests in place, and India has not done anything per se which goes against Ukraine. And, this was also respected by the Russian side. The Russians were not expecting India to jump the gun and take an out and out anti-Ukraine or anti-Russian stand. So this is something which has been respected by both countries. So if both the countries are respecting this neutrality that India has followed, then there's no reason why other nations should not accept it.
Abhishek and Paulomi, thank you very much. Appreciate you joining us on this. Now, we know that this war has gone on beyond a month in these times. Borders on, in fact, what we see, that this has gone on for 100 days. And it's certainly unfortunate that we see that millions of people have been displaced in that war-torn country of Ukraine. But Russia and Ukraine war has continued 4 months on, no end in sight. Did Putin really underestimate Ukraine? That's the question that people ask, because the thrust with which Ukraine, in fact, Russia led into the war with Ukraine was not as pacey as one expected. But nonetheless, they've sustained the war for 100 days. So this is a somber landmark, undoubtedly. The question is whether this was Russia's plan right from the start to take it slow and go on because they knew this was going to be a long haul, or was the West miscalculating the punitive measures against Russia, which was done precious little to stop this war? Meanwhile, Russia, on the other hand, has now captured territory beyond the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine, and if winter sets in, reclaiming territories would become near impossible. Here's a listen.
"100 days of a deadly war which has led to millions rendered homeless. Cities after cities destroyed, and a divided world on how to handle Russia. For the people who have families on both sides of the border, the war wounds run very deep, and it will take a very long time to heal. What was a special military operation evolved into a bloody war of attrition, with no winners and none vanquished."
When the opponent disappeared, both the Warsaw Treaty disappeared and the Soviet Union disappeared, they decided that they will move the line of defense eastward. And they did this 5 times without explaining against whom they're going to defend themselves.
But the world found a war hero and a villain.
You're dealing every day with Vladimir Putin. I mean, look at what he's done to these people. What does it make you think? He's a butcher.
Russia had done the groundwork before invading Ukraine. It all began on 21st February 2022, when the State Duma of Russia passed a bill to officially recognize the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic of the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine as independent states. President Putin signed the decree along with separatist leaders of Donetsk and Luhansk, and further signed agreements on friendship, cooperation and assistance with the republics. On 24th February, Russia invaded Ukraine after DPR and LPR sought assistance from Moscow to demilitarize and denazify the region.
Bakhmut, Popasna, Severodonetsk.
In this axis, the occupiers have concentrated the most significant activity for now. They created a bloodbath there and are trying to destroy everything. Everything alive. Literally, no one has destroyed Donbas in the way that the Russian troops are doing now. I'm grateful to everyone, all our warriors who hold positions and have the bravery to counterattack.
Позиції і мають хоробрість контратакувати.
But Putin has gone beyond the Donbass, and the timelines have shifted. What was supposed to be a quick shock and awe invasion has gone on for more than 4 months. Beyond the Donbass, Russia continues to conduct long-range missile strikes against infrastructure across Ukraine, the UK's Ministry of Defence said. Putin failed to topple Zelensky's regime, putting in place a pro-Russia leader like Medvedchuk. Hard negotiations to seek recognition of DPR and LPR as independent states. Negotiate recognition of Crimea as part of Russia. Crippling sanctions. Europe weaning off Russia gas. Finland and Sweden applying for NATO membership.
In the last few weeks, there were unlawful measures taken against Russia by the number of Western countries to freeze Russian assets. By doing this, the collective West has undermined the reliability of their currencies.
But on sanctions, Moscow is still holding out. In fact, the real test of stopping Russian gas imports will be seen during winters. Many European nations like Hungary, Slovakia are yet to find alternatives to Russian gas, and until that happens, many would seek exemption. The war has also led to severe food shortage and rise in food prices. For Zelensky, who dared Russia with NATO membership, there have been major failures too. Zelensky could not secure NATO membership. He couldn't secure EU membership. Assured the nation of NATO intervention, but none came. Delays in getting military assistance from the West. Europe became a divided house. No consensus on how to tackle Russia. Lost major swaths of land beyond Donbass. The core of the Russia-Ukraine war is the Donbass region. A region that has seen conflict for the past 8 years since the 2014 Euromaidan conflict, an uprising that was the beginning of the pro-West regime in Kyiv, with pro-Russia parts of Ukraine demanding separate state. Donbass will remain a conflict zone for a long time to come. But the question would remain about the other parts of eastern Ukraine, which are yet to be reclaimed by Kyiv. With nuclear threats from Russia, the two sides could be pushed back to the negotiating table.
Let me cut across to Ukraine President Zelensky, who spoke on the war. Let's have a listen.
Лідер фракції тут, голова Офісу Президента тут, прем'єр-міністр України Шмигаль тут, Подоляк тут, президент тут. Наша команда набагато більше. Збройні сили України тут. Найголовніше – наш народ, народ нашої держави тут. Захищаємо Україну вже 100 днів. Перемога за нами. Слава Україні!
Well, that was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressing Ukrainians on Friday, the 100th day since Russia invaded the country. Zelensky was joined by several officials in his address during the Prime Minister Denis and the head of presidential office, Audrey T. Yermak. He, in fact, sounded quite confident as he said, victory will be ours. That's what Zelensky said. The man who runs Russia, on the other hand, is estranged from his family. He lives a life in public, but it's lonely life full of threats that he alone has to battle all the time. Ukrainian intelligence chief in May claimed that as recent as March this year, an attempt was made on Vladimir Putin's life. He survived, but now lives under constant threat of coup. Here's a quick report on that.
Once an agent of sophisticated spy agency KGB of USSR, Vladimir Putin is no stranger to coup or assassination bids. Russian history from the days of Tsar Ivan the Terrible have always relied on intricate surveillance of its population and inner governing circuits. The KGB was responsible for this in the USSR regime. In modern Russia, the job is performed by the FSB. Vladimir Putin relies on them heavily. Right after his invasion of Ukraine in the early weeks of March 2022, Putin reportedly survived an assassination bid. There is no official confirmation of it from the Kremlin. Head of Ukraine's Chief Intelligence Directorate, Karailo Budanov, in an interview to a Ukrainian media outlet, claimed that there was an attempt to assassinate Putin. He was even attacked, it is said, by representatives of the caucus not so long ago. This is non-public information. It was an absolutely unsuccessful attempt, but it really happened. It was about 2 months ago. I repeat, this attempt was unsuccessful. There was no publicity about this event, but it took place. The Caucasus region includes the once restive Republic of Chechnya, which saw a bloody Islamist insurgency that Putin had suppressed. Budanov also claimed that a coup is brewing in the Kremlin corridors.
This will lead to a change of leadership of the Russian Federation. This process has already been launched and they are moving that way. Yes, they are moving in this way and it is impossible to stop it.
Another Western media reported that the Russian president fears he could be killed after he sacked senior generals over their failures to capture Ukraine. He uses his body double as a decoy. Again, there is no confirmation to any of these claims. But in a 2017 interview to a filmmaker, Oliver Stone, Vladimir Putin accepts that there has been 5 attempts on his life and that he relies heavily on his security agency for his survival. It was the KGB that masterminded the coup against former Soviet Union President Mikhail Gorbachev and led to his ouster. Putin was the Lieutenant Colonel of FSB before he became the Prime Minister of Boris Yeltsin's government. He worked hard to gain the president's trust to succeed him in less than 12 months of becoming the Prime Minister. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin walks in the shadow of threat of a coup or an assassination to end his rule all the time, since he assumed higher echelons of Russian power. Bureau Report, India Today.
Now, speculations are rife over Putin's health after videos of Putin surfaced that hinted at ailing Putin. Ukrainian military intelligence chief, however, has made this shocking claim, saying that Putin is in bad physical health, but there's not much really to corroborate his statement. But nonetheless, there's several rumors doing the rounds that Putin could be seriously ill, could also have cancer. Here's a report.
April 2022. Russian invasion of Ukraine was about 2 months old. Russian President Vladimir Putin had a meeting with his defense minister Sergei Shoigu. In the video recording and the photographs of the meeting, the Russian president's physical appearance raised a few eyebrows. He's seen slumping and clinging to the edge of a tiny table as if to steady himself against a tremor or vertigo. He did not let go of the table in the entire 12 minutes of the video. Putin moves his feet up and down, appears restless and tense, and clears his throat a number of times while listening to the minister's briefing. Within another couple of weeks at the Victory Day parade in Moscow, the Russian president is seen sitting among the veterans with a warm blanket covering his lap. He was the only one on the dais with a blanket. Then came an explosive interview of the man heading Ukraine's intelligence agency.
We can confirm that Putin is in very bad psychological and physical condition. He is very sick. He has various illnesses at the same time, one which is cancer.
In the second week of May, a US magazine reported on an audio recording of a conversation between a Western venture capitalist taped in mid-March with the Russian oligarch close to President Putin. In this secretly recorded conversation, the magazine reported that the oligarch refers to the Russian president and says he absolutely ruined Russia's economy, Ukraine's economy and many other economies. He even goes on to say that the problem is with his head. One crazy guy can turn the world upside down. The information is not verified, but there are certain factors that can't be ignored. The fact that the man at the helm of Kremlin affairs completely isolated himself throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and seemed paranoid with screenings of guests raised few sincere questions about his sound health conditions. Russian independent media reported that anyone who wanted to meet or get close to the Russian president were asked to take a PCR test and even provide fecal samples. Vladimir Putin had meetings with foreign visitors both before and during the war at medieval banquet-length tables that ensured complete social distancing, but neither he nor any of his guests ever wore a mask at any of these meetings. This October, Vladimir Putin will turn 70 years old. He is no longer the agile alpha man in his late 40s, who took charge of the Russian presidency for the first time in 1999 December. Moscow grapevine is ripe with rumors and doubts about the president's physical and psychological well-being.
Now, as the Russia-Ukraine war enters its third month, a chilling claim has now been made by a Russian intelligence officer. The Russian officer has claimed that President Putin is losing his eyesight. He has been given only 3 years to live. That's what he says. Is Putin really not fit to lead this war? As we see that the war is completed 100 days, a lot of speculation on Putin's health. Here's a report.
The man who waged a war on over 4 crore people, displacing millions. The man who changed the world order overnight. Russian President Vladimir Putin may have only 3 years to live. This chilling claim comes from a Russian intelligence officer. A Federal Security Service officer quoted by The Independent has claimed that Putin suffers from a rapidly progressing cancer. The officer has also alleged that 69-year-old Putin is losing his eyesight. The claims come amid growing speculation that Putin's health is deteriorating rapidly. The Kremlin has denied reports on Putin's health condition. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Sunday said there were no signs pointing to any ailment or illness. The Independent reports the FSB officer revealed the information on Putin's health to former Russian spy Boris Karpechkov, who is currently living in the UK. The Russian officer reportedly said, "We are told he is suffering from headaches, and when he appears on TV, he needs a piece of paper with everything written in huge letters to read what he is going to say. They are so big, each page can only hold a couple of sentences. His eyesight is seriously worsening," the spy said, adding that Putin's limbs are now also shaking uncontrollably. Rumors about the Russian president's health reportedly originated through the popular Russian telegram channel General SVR. The channel claimed that Putin's doctors had warned him a surgery might incapacitate him for a short time, and that during this period, the president should briefly hand over the reins of power to an aide. The Russian president had also undergone cosmetic procedures in a bid to improve his tough guy image. Bureau Report, India Today.
Now, the war rages on as invaders from across the border try to overrun Ukraine. The ordered objective of Russian forces here is to get rid of the man who has rallied his country to stand and fight. President Volodymyr Zelensky is an unlikely hero, an unassuming wartime leader of a country under siege currently. He is the puny David of Ukraine against the Russian Goliath of a bully. A man who thought comedy was his forte, really, caught in a tragic role of being a president of a nation that's now been invaded. And yet, it is in this role that President Zelensky has found his largest audience ever, the people of the world. Let's have a look.
Всім добрий вечір. Лідер фракції тут, голова Офісу президента тут, прем'єр-міністр Шмигаль тут, Подоляк тут, президент тут.
His is the voice of defiance, a call from the heart that has gone out and firmed the defense of Ukraine against the forces of invasion.
I'm here to protect my wife, my family, myself, my country from the Russian invasion.
We will fight for our land and we will kill all Russians.
If somebody give me a weapon, I will fight. I'm not afraid.
Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, had everything wrong about being a wartime leader of a nation invaded. He's from Jewish stock in Eastern Europe with its history of anti-Semitism. His family spoke Russian. He grew up speaking the language of the invader. He happened to be a comic by profession. In 2019, the comic actor decided to run for presidency. And people took that as a joke. He called his party the Servant of the People Party. The outcome was comic relief. Volodymyr Zelensky won 73% of the votes and promised to bring peace to the restive eastern regions of Luhansk and Donetsk. What came was war. Not with Russia, but with his Russian namesake, Vladimir.
Once again, I appeal to the servicemen of Ukrainian armed forces. Don't let neo-Nazis and Banderites use your children, your wives and old people as human shields. Take power into your own hands. It seems that it will be easier for us to come to terms with you than with this gang of drug addicts and neo-Nazis who settled in Kyiv and took all Ukrainian people hostage.
Volodymyr Zelensky was born in 1978 into a Russian-speaking Jewish family of the then Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine. His father was a professor of mathematics and his mother had studied engineering. The town of his birth, Kyiv, stands next to Babi Yar, where 33,771 Jews were shot and thrown into a ravine over the course of 2 days in 1941. Zelensky studied law and earned a degree in it, only to found a TV entertainment company. Zelensky found success in his vaudeville act. He and a few friends created a comedy troupe that became a famous act not just in Ukraine, as well as other Russian-speaking regions of a post-Soviet world. The prism through which Volodymyr Zelensky viewed the world changed when Vladimir Putin invaded the land of his birth in 2014. That was what made him take his first political step. He donated a fortune to arm the then weak army of Ukraine. He chose his side when he relocated his production company to Kyiv and began to fully master the Ukrainian language. Something that was to be a big help when he played the most successful comic role of his life. In the TV series Servant of the People, Zelensky plays a school history teacher whose rant against the rampant corruption in government gets recorded without his knowledge by a student and is posted on social media. The video goes viral, and without even wanting the job, the teacher gets elected president of Ukraine. And then, through set pieces, bumbles his way to become a heroic leader of his country. On 20th of May 2019, facts overtook fiction when the 41-year-old Volodymyr Zelensky took the oath of the highest office in Ukraine. And when the new president had to make his inaugural address, he said, "It wasn't just me who took the oath." He said, "Each of us put a hand on the Constitution and each of us has sworn loyalty to Ukraine." It was an oath of loyalty that the unlikely politician would prove himself worthy of in the conflicts to come. Despite the fact that entertainers entering politics are viewed, if not with suspicion, but certainly with skepticism.
Наявною у нас інформацією ворог позначив мене як ціль номер 1, мою родину як ціль номер 2.
President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine is believed to be number 1 on Vladimir Putin's hit list. Western intelligence agencies have claimed this, and Zelensky himself has acknowledged it. He says his family is second on the list, but that he and they will remain in Ukraine. He categorically turned down a US offer of evacuation. Instead, he asked for arms.
Nobody will force us Ukrainians to give away our freedom, our independence, our sovereignty. But it looks like the Russian leadership is trying to do it just by the way of destroying their own country.
To prove that he is still there and not running away, the president of Ukraine has been regularly posting self-taken videos in front of the very recognizable presidential palace, telling the people of Ukraine that he is living up to his promise, even if he has to die for it. Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is playing the role of a lifetime. He has already given a performance that has made him a hit across the world. This unlikely wartime leader of his country has won the hearts and minds of people around the world. His actions has more than established the contrast with his nemesis, with whom he shares a first name, the meaning of which ironically means ruler of the world. When Vladimir Putin ordered his troops to invade Ukraine, he possibly made one miscalculation. He had not accounted for the stellar performance that his opponent was capable of giving. A role that has touched the heartstrings of audiences across the globe. Whatever be the outcome of this war in Ukraine, history will record Zelensky as the hero in shining armor. While Putin has already joined the ranks of all-time world villains like Hitler and Stalin. When the world's a stage and everyone is but an actor in it, there is no doubting that Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine stands at the edge of that stage, where life meets performance and only truth shines forth.
Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has addressed Ukrainians on Friday, the 100th day since Russia invaded the country. Zelensky was joined by several officials in his address, including Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal and the head of presidential office, Andriy Yermak. And he sounds quite confident as he says, victory will be ours. Let's have a listen.
Лідер фракції тут, голова Офісу президента тут, прем'єр-міністр України Шмигаль тут, Подоляк тут, президент тут. Наша команда набагато більше. Збройні сили України тут. Найголовніше – наш народ, народ нашої держави тут. Захищаємо Україну вже 100 днів. Перемога за нами. Слава Україні!
Now, as the Russia-Ukraine war enters 100 days, we bring to you the most defining images of the conflict that has changed lives of millions. Here are images coming in. Heavy Russian shelling on Kyiv has changed the entire landscape of the capital city. Once a bustling city of millions now stands in ruins with everything reduced to rubble. As soon as the first shelling started to happen right there in Kyiv, roads leading out of it were jam-packed with people trying to reach their homes away from Kyiv, where the country was bombarded. Roads to Kyiv was locked in car jams. In the initial days of the invasion, Russian forces attacked the main television tower in the heart of Ukraine's capital of Kyiv. The attack potentially disrupted the tower's signal. In the opening combat of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Mi Russian helicopters launched a deadly air assault on Kyiv's Hostomel airport to seize it. And in the effort to fight against Russian forces, a brewery in Ukraine has gone from making beer to Molotov cocktails. Residential buildings in the capital city of Kyiv have been reduced to rubble after relentless bombing by the Russian forces, death, despair and destruction after 100 days of war. Irpin and Bucha, both heavily bombarded by Russian forces. India Today's cameras capture the devastation on our cameras. As Russian troops tried to take control over the capital city, Kyiv residents took up arms to stand in the fight along with the country's military against Moscow's invasion. Ukrainian soldiers destroy the column of Russian tanks and armored vehicles on a rural road. Bodies of hundreds of civilians were found in Bucha after Russian forces pulled out of Kyiv suburb. Over 100 mass graves were found with hundreds of bodies in them. Ukraine accused Russia of committing war crimes. 300 people were killed when Russian forces attacked a theatre in the port city of Mariupol. It was believed that around 1,300 civilians were using the theatres as bomb shelters to escape Russia's brutal attack. Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, the largest of its kind in Europe, was attacked by Russian troops. A massive nuclear disaster loomed after the attack. This image of a pregnant woman in Mariupol hospital bombing became the iconic image of this war. She was rescued from that rubble but didn't live too long. She gave birth to a stillborn and soon after died as the war continued to go on. While the war raged, civilians trained to defend their country. National anthem became one of the tunes that united Ukrainians and motivated them to go on. UNICEF reports that in the 100 days of war in Ukraine, 5.2 million children are now in need of humanitarian assistance. At least 262 children have been killed, 415 injured in the attacks since 24th of February. In an attempt to save life and build it afresh away from the war, Ukrainians now have risked their lives. They've walked miles, crossed broken bridges to reach safe harbor in a foreign land among unknown people. What used to be a transport exit, the metro stations of Kyiv during war became safe shelter from shelling and bombing to save lives. The Donbas region in eastern Ukraine has, from the very beginning, been in the heart of this crisis. Buildings and civil amenities stand destroyed as both sides shell hard to lay claim on the land and its people. The world's largest aircraft, AN-225 Maria, has been destroyed by Russian strikes outside Kyiv on the fourth day of Moscow's invasion. Russia's flagship missile cruiser Moskva was hit by Ukraine. Kyiv is said to have fired 2 Neptune anti-ship missiles at the Russian warships. And since the beginning of the war, nearly 12.8 million people are estimated to have been displaced in Ukraine. Kids, adults, elderly, just everyone ran to neighboring countries in a hope for a better and a safe haven. And Russian soldiers captured by Ukrainians were the first clear proof to refute Moscow's denials. One of them have recently been given life in prison sentence by a Kyiv court for killing an unarmed civilian. And on 21st of April, Putin declared Mariupol as liberated after nearly 2 months of siege. However, hundreds of Ukrainian defenders remain defiant inside the city's huge Azovstal steelworks. On 1st of May, about 100 Ukrainian civilians were evacuated from Mariupol's ruined Azovstal steelworks. The United Nations called it a safe passage operation. There has been 2 phases of multiple rounds of inconclusive peace talks. The first one started in Belarus, the Belarus-Ukraine border on the 28th of February itself. 4 days after the war started, 100 days later, an agreeable peace deal between Ukraine and Russia remains unattainable. And here, in a sign of solidarity with Ukraine, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, United Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Canadian Prime Minister met with Ukrainian President Zelensky in Kyiv. All right, now 100 days on and the war continues. In fact, Russia's invasion at this point on Ukraine is certainly no end in sight. Kyiv's main Maiden Square still has the telltale anti-tank roadblocks in a sign of the ongoing conflict. The war has brought the world a near daily drumbeat of gut-wrenching visuals that you see here. All right, here is India Today bringing you relentless coverage on the Ukraine war. 100 days on, and we bring to you the exclusive images that have really destroyed a country that once stood. We're going to take you through much of those details, but for now, it's a wrap.